I would say that Mossad's been treating Iran like its playground for many years now. They've played a role in sabotage on Iran's nuclear facilities, defense facilities, the assassination of top nuclear scientists, and even the stealing of sensitive nuclear files. So I think a lot of folks are pointing their fingers at Israel given that context.
It's pretty bold to strike in Tehran itself.
Well, not just that. The same day that was the inauguration of the country's new President, Masoud Pezeshkian, with 110 foreign delegations in the country.
So there's now worry about the response to the response. What's about to happen?
Well, we've heard publicly from the Supreme Leader himself, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has actually said that he vows revenge. We've also seen that the United Nations, the Iranian permanent mission to the United Nations has publicly said that they're going to engage in special operations, which I would say is a signaling to the West and Israel that they're not going to be directly responding like the way we saw in April, where Iran fired 300 ballistic missiles, drones at Israel directly, but it sounds like they're going to respond. It's just a matter of when and how.
And striking against an individual, this becomes a tit for tat?
It would seem very likely because they do see this as an eye for an eye, and the fact that they didn't cite the UN Charter, which is what they did last time, which was they used international law to make their case, tells me that this is going to be a different kind of response than what we saw in April.
Yeah. To your point, Iran's Supreme Leader responding to say that Iran considers revenge as its duty, written on his official website. How do you read into that?
Well, the talk of revenge is very common with the Supreme Leader in these contexts. He also vowed revenge when the IRGC commander was taken out in Damascus at the Iranian embassy compound in Syria. That prompted the big tit-for-tat we saw in April. He's also said that in the context of Quds Force Commander Qasem Soleimani. So there's this sense that they have to respond or else there's going to be seen as a sign of weakness.
Benjamin Netanyahu can relate with that. I started by referring to the risk that he's willing to take here in this case. What is going on inside the inner circle that surrounds Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, we're nearly 10 months into the Gaza war that was prompted by Hamas's terrorist attack on Israel on October 7th. And while these have been ongoing, the key point of Netanyahu's strategy was to take out Hamas. And we've seen that not just Haniyeh, the political chief, was taken out, but reportedly Mohammad Deif, one of the key military commanders in Hamas. So in some ways, this is at least giving the appearance that they're actually making good on that commentary that they're going to take out Hamas. Not the ideology itself, but its leadership.
Well, so what do you make of this prospect? We keep hearing about worries about a wider war, that this could become a regional conflict that could even draw Iran and the U.S. Into it. But a lot of the smart analysis I've heard is that every party is trying to avoid that. It doesn't help Hamas, it doesn't help Hezbollah, and it doesn't help Israel.
Absolutely. I know, like, looking from the outside in, it's like, well, how is this not going to? All these different tit-for-tat strikes in various shapes and forms. But absolutely, none of these regional partners or foes want to see a wider war spread because this would drag everyone in. It's not just an Iran-Israel thing. It's a Lebanon. It's a Syria. It's an Iraq item. So, and even the Gulf. And so one would hope that cooler heads will prevail. But this is why when you see this signaling from the Iranian admission saying so publicly how their response will look like that, it's almost de-escalatory, even though they are going to respond. And this is exactly what happened in April.
That's fascinating. Is the U.S. Still in Benjamin Netanyahu's ear, or has the tension over this war with Hamas broken down the credibility of the administration when it reaches out to Netanyahu?
Well, I think one of the things that are really playing have complicated things is the U.S. election itself. We suddenly have a possible different Democratic presidential candidate with Biden no longer
who is
on the
perceived differently.
Yes. And so I think that Netanyahu is having to cautiously keep that in the back of his mind, like who will be in office come January.
Is he worried about Kamala Harris winning?
I mean, I would say that you're not going to see too much of a difference between the Biden policy, but at the end of the day, we really don't know what Kamala Harris's Middle East strategy, with the exception of her comments that were made after her meeting with Netanyahu last week. But when you're looking at the big picture with where things are going, I think that Netanyahu is having to tread carefully because he also has to think about his own career,
Sure.
which is at risk as well.
Well, that's right. Kamala Harris is striking. Will say exactly the same thing word for word as Joe Biden, but will be applauded by members of the squad, and it will be interpreted differently. When she had those remarks following the meeting, she didn't say anything Joe Biden had not said before and calling for a ceasefire, but it landed differently. Why?
I think the way she talked about the conflict itself, I remember reading some of the analysis was that it was seen as more balanced because it wasn't talking just about what was happening in Israel, but what was happening with the humanitarian situation on the ground in Gaza.
She says our support is ironclad when it comes to Israel, right?
Correct.
So it's kind of the same message.
Yes, it's just, I would say, boxed a little differently, as you noted.
What's the message from Donald Trump? There's been talk of a feud between these two. They got back together at Mar-a-Lago. We all saw the hug. What's Donald Trump's Israel policy? Does Benjamin Netanyahu know?
Well, I think that Donald Trump, or former U.S. President Donald Trump's view is he's a deal maker. If this war drags on till, let's say, if he was to win the election come January, he's going to want to make a deal because he would like to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
He'd like the Nobel Peace Prize?
Yes, he's always seemed to hint at that. I know.
By way of Israel?
I mean, he would like to be the peacemaker between, to end the war, and I really think
Is that a good thing?
I mean, nobody wants a war to go on, but I think that when Donald Trump thinks about the conflict, he's thinking about making a deal.
That's fascinating. And that would probably go for Ukraine as well, right? So he sweeps in, brings both conflicts to a close, wins the Nobel Peace Prize. That's the idea?
I mean, that in his world, potentially, yes.
In Kamala Harris's world, does the ceasefire happen before November? Is that something that Benjamin Netanyahu would wait to see?
Well, I think that the fact that Ismail Haniyeh was just assassinated, who was the chief negotiator, has definitely delayed negotiations. It hasn't ended them, but I think that may possibly go past November. We'll have to see.